my secret. Just do something that ain't nobody ever done before, but make it sound like something that's always been there forever.
Welcome to This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At Iba Pa, my name is Elaine Delalas, and I'm here with my fellow hosts,
Joe Bernardo.
And then Mike.
Wait, hold on. What are you doing, dude? She turned on the TV.
Wait, what order should we do this?
Oh yeah, let's restart. So maybe it'd be Joe, Kat, special host Kat, and then you end on you.
Okay.
Do you want to say that I'm filling in for Ryan, or
No, we'll say like Ryan's. We'll just say Ryan's absent.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
In the after the roll call, we'll do.
Yeah, after the roll call.
All right. There we go.
Better.
It's like, what the fuck?
All right. 3, 2.
Welcome to This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At Iba Pa, my name is Elaine Delalas, and I'm joined by my fellow hosts,
Joe Bernardo,
and special guest featured player host,
Kat Carrido Bonds,
and
Mike.
Producer Mike. Shoo!
There. That sounds like a better horn.
That sounds better.
Yeah.
Kat is filling in for Ryan today.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Ryan can't be with us, but our thoughts are with him right now at the moment.
Another episode without Ryan, but I could fill in again.
Okay, be Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I work for the city.
Wait,
I like food.
I can be Ryan. Hi, I'm Ryan. I love the Lakers. The Clippers are terrible.
I can't even say anything bad about the homie. You know what I'm saying?
But we miss you, Ryan. Hopefully you'll be back soon. Sending all our thoughts and good energies to you. TFAL of the episode is Leo Albia.
Leo. If you don't know Leo, he is behind the company One Down. I'm sure you have seen their videos and all their other content that they have on One Down. Our partners over there. We've done collaborations with them before.
Yeah, so you should go follow them. They're at One Down Media. ONEDWN Media on Instagram. I said zero like an old.
We got it though.
But you understood. Circle
NE.
Lord Jesus.
Oh my God. Yeah, but what are we talking about on this episode, Mike?
I don't know. I didn't read the notes.
Wow, you didn't read the notes. You're a terrible producer.
We are talking
I just record the shows. I don't talk on them.
We are talking about the process of death or process of passing away. So all the logistics that go into it, all the kind of spiritual aspect of it, the grieving process, all that we are going to talk to a special death midwife or doula. Her name is
Michelle Mondia.
Sorry, I forgot on the top of my head, but
it's all good.
Yeah.
And it's a really great conversation. You know, one of us cries. Guess who? Probably me.
Mike.
But it's a really important conversation given the times that we're in and a lot of the experiences that we're going through at the moment. So I'm hoping that for folks listening, that this helps you all if you are in the middle of the process of death or grief for anybody in your life right now.
Or maybe not, and you just want to plan ahead because it isn't an inevitable thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a taboo subject in our community, in our culture. Well, that maybe Filipino Americans especially.
Yeah.
But it's something that we all need to confront. We all need to face. because it's inevitable, as our guest has reminded us.
Yes.
Death is inevitable.
And talking about death allows you to engage with life fully. And I feel like these conversations are great starters to have with your loved ones. So, for sure.
But before we get into the actual interview, have you heard of a death doula or death midwife before?
Nope.
Before
we interviewed
Michelle,
No. The
I would
answer
say-
is negative.
No. I
Nope.
heard about a death doula in maybe like 2018.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because when our friend was going through the process of losing her father, it was a long process. And she had mentioned that she was working with a death doula. She had mentioned she had been working with Michelle. And so our friend said, she'd be great to have on TFAL. And that was one of those things you just like file it away, like add it to the long hundreds of people list that we have going of folks that we want to talk to. And after losing my dad, I kind of circled back and it just worked out. And so I knew about what a death doula was very recently, and honestly, like it's still a new thing. And honestly, like I'm really fascinated with how this conversation will go and how folks will take this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a new thing now in our kind of modern times, but I'm sure it's existed, hundreds, thousands of years. And it's something that we really need to get back to,
Yes,
Agreed.
absolutely.
Yeah. So next up is we have an interview with Michelle Mondia. She's a death doula / midwife. And we have a great conversation that I think everybody will benefit from. So stay tuned.
Do you know how people can support us if they don't have any money but want to give us some shout outs?
How?
I wonder how.
Well, they can log on to iTunes and give us 5 stars. That's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-star reviews on iTunes.
Wow. It's like Yelp, but for podcasts.
It totally is like Yelp, but for podcasts. You could probably Yelp us too if you wanted. But on iTunes, if you give us 5 stars, we're more visible to people. We're more searchable. And we'll actually be one of the more top shows out there on if you search Filipino American on iTunes.
Oh, nice. I'm going to go and rate us 5 stars right now.
You haven't done it?
Oh, wait. I did it. I did it 2016.
Did you do one, Mike?
I don't have Apple devices or an iTunes
Oh.
Or you could be like Tony Gertz, who wrote, "Love you guys. Thanks for all the great conversations and education around these experiences and stories. Heart emoji."
Is his brother Yo?
Yogurts. High five.
So take some time if you listen to us, if you like us, go on iTunes, put a quick review, put 5 stars for This Filipino American Life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we're back. I hope you like that ad. I hope you buy a t-shirt or watch some TFC or what else is there? Write us a 5-star review, all that good stuff.
I hope you buy a car.
Buy a car? Do we have that?
No.
Do we have that? Oh my God.
Wishful thinking.
One day, if I get a sponsorship by Toyota or a random Filipino car company, sure.
But
Oh my God. Very excited to talk to our guest today. Her name is Michelle Mondia. Michelle is a death doula. And this is actually something that I had my mom write down a definition of what this was. Because when I talked to her this afternoon, I told her, I can't talk to you. I can't practice iPad with you because I'm interviewing somebody. And she's like, "Who are you interviewing?" And I'm like, "A death doula, Mom." And she's like, "What's that?" She's like, "What's a doula?" Is that an English word? And I was like, oh, mom. And so, according to Wikipedia, a death doula is a person who assists in the dying process, much like a midwife or doula does with the birthing process. It is often a community-based role aiming to help families cope with death through recognizing it as a natural and important part of life. So, Michelle, could you please share a little bit about yourself? And
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
And
Welcome
yes,
to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about such an unusual profession and something that's very intimate to me. But yes, death doula is kind of akin to a birth midwife, and that's actually how I got into the work, having given birth to both of my children at home in a water birth, and with a midwife for both births attending. And I, in essence, what we do basically is assist in the dying process, and by that I mean helping the family in the caring for the body before, during, and after death. It's also assisting in any spiritual practices that they may have, with the goal of having, I don't like to use this, but it's been used before, a good death, But essentially what that means is giving an opportunity to not experience suffering. And we're a very death averse society, and we don't want to say the word death sometimes. Dying, dead, it feels very nakakatakot. It's it's kind of spooky. But it's not an if phenomena, it's a when. So it's an experience that we will all go through, and we've been through with our friends and loved ones. And so, but the death doula, the term itself is very specific to assisting bedside with the ones who are dying, like vigiling with them, and allowing them to be okay, and give them the guidance to say, or permission even, that's okay. Yeah, your breathing is part of the natural course of letting go of things. But I'm actually a certified death midwife, and there's a controversy in using the word midwife, primarily because of the birth midwife field. We're not under any medical profession, so that's partly what it is. And to be frank, personally, I don't want to be medicalized. I don't want this field to go through that, the Western way of, delegate or just regulation of my profession. And so as a death midwife, I assist from this, from the beginning of, let's say somebody comes to me, which I do a lot of work with families who are not in the dying process, but who wants to have, what I do is prepare I call death file. It's bringing together all the documentations. How do you close this business? How do you of living? What are the paperwork do I need to do? How do I prepare for such a momentous day for myself or for my family? In fact, I'm getting a lot of folks in their 30s who are thinking about this for their parents or for themselves, and because. And then maybe you have experiences dealing with your dad or anybody else in the show. Even when expected, there's the logistics of pulling together everything else on top of the grieving that the family is experiencing. It's really profound. And so the more I really advocate for preparing a lot of these things ahead of time. So that's one aspect, of midwifery, all the way to being bedside with the person who's dying, to aftercare, which is like final disposition. Do you want to be you want to do a green burial? Do you want to be cremated? This is a very universal practice in that I assisted in Jewish, sitting Shiva, Muslims. They have to be pretty much buried 24 hours after death. And so from Christian to the Buddhist tradition. And so it doesn't really matter what spiritual or religious practice you come from. We honor that. and then obviously sometimes there are lingering grieving needs that need to be attended to, for example. So I'll stay on until a week, sometimes a month, helping families figure out what to do with some of the either logistical things like splitting the ashes and how do you transport it interstate. So all these things that come along with all of that. But I got drawn into this for the spiritual practice of going back to what we've forgotten as human beings. We forgot how to die, and we forgot how to care for people who are dying so much that we've outsourced it to billion-dollar funeral homes and industry. And because of that, I think we've really forgotten such an important opportunity for us to attend to. So a long definition of the work.
Yeah.
But it's hard to kind of be succinct with that because it encompasses so many things.
Just real quick, regarding your responsibilities as a death midwife, what percentage is more logistical, like, taking care of, papers and contracts or whatever, whatnot, and what percentage is, more of the spiritual aspect?
It depends, because there's some some people come to me and say, I just want you to be by bedside. Depends on, it's not, so some just wants to do all the documentation. But primarily a lot of them come to me at the end of, my dad just died, my dad is about to die. What do I do? In that moment of kind of figure out what they need to do. And that's probably what I get the most of. This is why I'm pushing for a lot of the preparation ahead of time. So you're not, you're not struggling with figuring out, did Nanay want to wear this Barong Tagalog? Did she want this? We don't know who's getting what, and does she want does she want her body to be brought back to the Philippines? All those things. And it all starts with a conversation, like a lot of things in life, right?
Yeah.
Which is hard conversation, especially with Filipino parents, I think.
I completely agree. I tried to have this conversation with my dad actually like 2 years ago. My dad had a health scare and he was in the hospital, and the case manager, social worker actually had the conversation with us. Like, do you have, like, asked me if I had power of attorney, because my mom, has some mental illnesses. So like she had a stroke in 2002. And so she has short-term memory loss, early signs of like certain dementias. And so essentially all the decision-making falls on me. I am the family representative for anything that needed to happen. And so the case manager was like, do you have an estate plan? All these things, et cetera, et cetera. And when my dad got out of the hospital, I tried to have those conversations with him. And he said, why does it matter, Elaine? It all goes to you. And then I was just like, that's not what I mean. And I tried to explain like what estate planning was, all these things. I have enough lawyer friends that they have told me this is something that you are supposed to do, that we are supposed to do because of our age and our parents, etc. And so when my dad got into the hospital, that's exactly, I was in the pickle that I was trying to avoid. And just, the universe provides, though, in certain crazy ways. Because when I was looking through files and whatnot, I found a business card for a woman that is a wills, trust, and estate planning attorney. So I was like, oh, maybe my dad did something. Maybe he actually had the foresight to do like plan advance directive, and he just didn't tell me. Turns out, not the case. Didn't have that. But the business card was actually for my cousin on my dad's side that I had only met like twice in my life. That she was just like, oh my gosh, you are my cousin. Like, we're having this conversation and she's like, you're my cousin. And I'm like, holy shit. This is the universe bringing it all together. Like, it all works out. And so I wish that like we had this. I wish I had like had a conversation with someone like you so that I would have not been as lost. Because I will admit, like, I am very lost at the moment because there's no way I'm gonna know what I'm doing. I've had guidance in my tita because she is a retired nurse. And most retired nurses seem to have this already, or most nurses have this planned. Like my aunt told me, no, I have an estate set up. I have this binder. It has everything I want. I've already bought my plot. I've already bought my area in the cemetery. Like she has it to the bone. And I was like, crap. I don't think they had it. And so because of what she told me, I knew what I needed to do, like next steps. But Mike can attest it. He bore witness to this. It was all rapid. It was all very fast. And like, I think I'm a Virgo type A person, logistics. So I can get really good at the task, but then I forget the feelings part. And then a week or 2 or 3 or a month later, it'll all come in a giant crying sob. And so it just feels like this process. I don't know if Filipinos really have this conversation, right?
Well, let me ask you this, Michelle. Like, what is the kind of current process that is, that's very Western, that's very corporate, that you are trying to kind of push away from? Like, what is kind of the death process that is so problematic right now?
I think it's not preparing. It's more, I think, from an emotional pushing away of changing the conversation around accepting death. We don't want to accept death. So, and because of that, I think we've tried to push everything as, bahala na, even that mentality that we have, just do whatever you want to do with me. And, and that's fine. But for me, it's really, and not just with Filipino Americans and Filipinos in general, but just changing the conversation about, it's really, I feel like sometimes my job is just to remind us of what we've forgotten, which is to die, how we've forgotten how to die on our own. And because of that, I've seen so many suffering of people dying in a hospital because they themselves have not really done some of the inner work of accepting where they are. And, whichever religious practice you come from, that may have ramification for your afterlife, for example, because you're very much stuck in the material world. The way I see, the way I approach death is an end of life is it's definitely a death of your physical body, but a birth of your spiritual life. And so for me, when I'm in that threshold, I don't see myself as really in such a, melancholic, depressive moment. I see myself more just like as a birth midwife, birthing a physical, earthly human, but allowing them to remove as much barriers so that they don't have to suffer and give birth to their spiritual life. And obviously, depending on what spiritual framework you come from, you can challenge me on that. But it's essentially changing the conversation that we know how to do this. We don't need to outsource this. Just like we knew how to give birth. When I gave birth, my kids, I remember really just bringing on the vision of my ancestors and them, kind of in surrounding me and letting me know that we've done this for hundreds and thousands of years. You can do this. You don't need to it's about unlearning what we think we know around death, that you have to go to the hospital, that you have to be embalmed. You don't have to be embalmed. There are some instances where you have to be, it's an autopsy. That's medically necessary if you die at home or if there's suspicions around your death. But for example, people don't know that they don't have to be embalmed. And also from a climate perspective, cremation is an issue around how much carbon that emits and how environmentally unfriendly that is compared to other forms of end of life practices, such as now, and providing just options for people to think about that. It's never a and just like and I don't know if you've experienced this with the birth of your child or your children, you may have a plan, but who knows what happens, right? You have to be really open to that. And so is with death and dying. The person I might have a plan, the family I might have come up with something, but it may not happen. And that's okay. And that's really okay. We have to take you to blah, 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 blah. Or I'm sorry, but we thought that we could bury you at sea, but it closed, or something like that.
The sea closed?
So,
No, I'm just
there's sea burial, yeah, in LA actually there is. But,
they're closed?
oh, wow.
No, it's not closed.
Oh.
But I'm just saying that's a, you have to be prepared to be open and flexible when you're working, just like in giving birth. So there's a lot of similarities, but it's just opening up the conversation that we don't want to discuss and we don't want to address. And I think there's so many gifts that can come from getting closer to that. But it's hard. It's hard. I understand it. Nobody wants to die and leave their family. I get it.
Yeah, it's not a monolithic, like, one size fits all process. And I think that's what Elaine's dad was thinking, like, well, you just die and then things get figured out. And like, even like in our heads, and to be clear, and to be frank, like in my family, we don't really, I think with Elaine's father passing away is the first time me and my family have had actually a discussion about, like, what is the plan? Because we just don't talk about those kind of things. I don't think we talk about, like, life changes as if it was like an inevitability, even though obviously death is. We're fans of the avoidance theory of family relations. That and like the passive aggressivist theory. But I mean, like, it's like, we don't. There's two things that are probably in the back of our heads. One is like, we don't want to talk about it. That's sad stuff. Let's not deal with it right now, right? Let's be happy while we can. And the other part of it is like, well, what more is there to it? Like, I get sick, go to the hospital, die, bury me, and then you guys are the kids and you guys will figure it out. But yeah, there's just so much more complexity. And as you were talking, I was thinking, I've never even asked my parents, like, what do you want us to do? And like, what is reasonable for you? Like, I wonder if they want to be buried in the Philippines. I wonder if they want to be buried in America. Would they be open to something other than like a traditional burial? I mean, we just,
these are all questions we'll have to ask them very soon.
But yeah, before Elaine's dad passed away, like, we tried to broach the subject, but like, we didn't even in our own minds, I think, even get into depth of like, well, yeah, maybe it'll just work out, or like there's some kind of plan. But I think just the taboo of the conversation is the biggest hurdle, at least as far as like my family experience has been.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I think for me, and you're right, absolutely. And I think I mentioned this, is start just having a conversation with people. When you can approach this in this way. It's not about talking about death. It's really talking about life, right? The more you can get rid of all this, documentations and all of these estate and whatnot. In essence, you are really, what I've learned most is, what I've gotten as the biggest gift of all is I've learned to really look at my life and how to live, and so death for me is about questioning my living. So there's that, there's really that. So it's not about getting stuck in this one moment, one last breath, but it's everything else in between, which I think is a beautiful gift that we can get from having conversations with people. And also just not only, part of the issue with saying, oh, bahala na, it's up to you, whatever you want to do with me. There's been very, challenging moments where, let's just say, a person dies in an accident, they're comatose. At what point do you say, did my dad want DNR? Do not resuscitate? These are like hardcore questions when, you're there and the doctors are asking you, what do you want us to do? Do you want him in a vegetative state? Do you want him, paralyzed, halfway down? And so when I work with people, we really unpack some of these things so that they will consider what is quality of life for them. Does it mean that I am in a vegetative state for 15 years and I'm okay with that? Or No, it's really, and so the most important thing that I would say, two things I would advise your listeners and everyone really, is it's free. You download California, advanced care directives, and you sign it with two witnesses. That would just basic information about, if you can, very basic information around where you want to, which if you have any hospitals that you want to go to, certain doctors, and very basic information. But I think the most important thing in that is you have to have a proxy. And this proxy is someone that you delegate who will advocate for you. Because when you do go to the hospital, unfortunately, sadly, it's all about the families doesn't know anything. We know everything. We are the medical professionals, and this is what we need to do. But my dad doesn't want to do that. My sister that's not akin to her, spiritual practices, for example. Well, it doesn't matter. This is what we need to do, because their business, and rightly so, is to save life. But at what cost? If you're not going to have the quality of life that you wish to have. And so sometimes, there's friction when we go to the hospital settings, and for example, an elder gentleman who said, I want to die. I don't want to eat. I don't want to drink. And the hospitals are very uncomfortable with that, because they don't want to witness somebody choosing to die. And this guy is probably have about 2 months to live, cancer everywhere. And he knows, just this, I want to feel my dying process, and I'm okay with that. But, in some cases when you don't have a proxy, or you can't speak, for example, if something happens to you and you can't speak, they're going to attempt to do everything they can to resuscitate you, or to bring you back to what they think is life. Right. So those are two things. You just get your California Advanced Care Directive, print it out, sign it, have a conversation with someone, and, and choose a proxy. And it's not necessarily your spouse or significant other, or your someone who's very close to you, because it's going to be really hard for them to say, to advocate for you. If your wishes would be to, let's say, something that would go against their wish. So you'd really want to think very hard about who you want to advocate for you, if and when they need to.
Is that something that like most states have, or is this something uniquely to California to have?
Oh, no, it's not. Most states have it.
Most states have it. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm actually part of a national program whereby we do video advanced care directives. So it's not just on paper, but you actually record yourself. And it's just like a QR code that they can download and say, oh, this is Mr. Panganiban, and this is the kind of medical procedure he's had, and he has a stent, for example, and these are his wishes. So let's say he gets into an accident, or somebody finds him unconscious and they don't know what to do. They can easily just either scan this code, and all the information in his own voice would be there. And I'm hoping that we could really roll that out. And because there's been a lot of cases many cases documented where you've been revived and you don't want to, or you've been killed when you didn't want to. And so we're trying to avoid all those unnecessary, negligence, I would say.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead, John.
I have a question. So among your duties as a death midwife, do you also mediate between, children who are quote unquote responsible for the parent? Or it doesn't have to be parent, but like just family members who are supposedly responsible for the.
Before you answer, I am curious about this, because I am an only child. So it all fell on me, but I am an only child in a Filipino large family. And so when we were doing the novena, when my dad was sick, I would have all of these titas trying to pick at me and tell me what I needed to do. And and I know how Filipino family dynamic can be and how it can get messy. But I stuck to my own self and was just like, look, I know you're trying to care, but you don't get to make these calls. It's going to be me. He's my dad. I don't have to listen to you, even though you're trying to care. And then I stuck with the guidance of my tita, who's also my nina, and she's a nurse. So I could rely on her medical knowledge, right? But also at the same token, like whatever she said to me, I could throw it out the window, because at the end of the day, it was my call. But I am curious as to what your answer will be, because what if you have siblings? What if you how does that dynamic work?
And I ask that because I am one of 3 siblings, and I anticipate some not infighting, but some tension, whether whenever that time comes.
Yeah, and this is why I think it helps to have a conversation with your parents, so that it's coming from their own wishes, right? But if it comes, I've witnessed that it's very uncomfortable, and I've been in situations where, what is she doing here? That's not what mom would want. She's not a priest, she's not a clergy. So, and even my role in it sometimes very much questioned, because they think it's kind of like I don't know,
like you're an outsider.
Yeah, and a witch doctor almost. Like, this is too esoteric. This is too weird. What are you doing? But we have to take it as this is a difficult time for the family. And one thing I have to remember in my work is that you leave your ego at the door. This is not about you. This is not about your grief. This is not about your projections, right? So this is how you can best hold the family. So going back to the question around that, I stay away from questions around, I don't have a say as to what the estate or the will would say and the wishes that they have. But I usually find a person who is at best clear-minded, and have them be a gatekeeper for myself, so I can do the work. Like, for instance, I was hired by someone who was dying of cancer, and so my loyalty is to his wishes, right? And so the rest of the family is like, no, we can't let him die on his own that way. But then I know that there's he had a son who was advocating for his father's wishes. And so I had to turn to him to say, can you help me facilitate the work that I need to do? I've never had a situation where, it's gotten, that's been unresolved. At the end of the day, though, Joe, almost everyone it just melts away. It just melts away when they see their parents or their child. Because my work has been lately in pediatric, so end of life for children, coming from, let's say, CHLA Children's Hospital or Orange County. And so, all that, I think it's just an expression of their grief and their suffering, and it becomes, a focal point for them to release that. And, but yeah, it happens. And I try to make sure that before I go in any situation, I know who the players are in the room. Like, I know who's going to be, with it, who's not going to be with it. I'm okay with that. But it's never my business to interfere with their grief. It's a hard place to be sometimes with, but it's easiest when it's like, well, you may not want that, but this is written in Dad's will. This is on his advanced care directive. And so it really behooves everyone to just have conversations and have some of these basic documents done.
Yeah, I'm someone who I've observed and witnessed death in my family starting when I was 10 years old, when my first grandparent passed. And I've been lucky to, I don't know if that's the word, but I would say it was lucky or honored, blessed to witness the way that my family, just the ritual, right? So it's like I've observed and practiced. And I remember when my Lola died in 2006, and she had everything planned out. She was always very organized, and we had the luxury at least of her preparing, like she had congestive heart failure, and she had time, and we could tell when she was ready to go. And I remember my She's my father's mom. And I remember my mom said to me, she was like, one of the greatest gifts that your Lola gave us is that she planned it all out. We didn't, she picked her thing, she picked the up into the flowers that were going to be on her casket. And she said, that's so loving. That was her last kind of sign of love to us, that she just picked it because we didn't have to worry about it. And that always stuck with me, because it is a lot of work, like when my Lolo died in 1987, when I was 10, my parents were still kind of young, they're younger than I am now, trying to figure out, of course my Lola was, the family all pitched in, but it was, it's a process. And then having seen death of all my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, and seeing the ritual, has been very helpful. But I will say that as a child, and my question is going to be about like the I guess the culture clash of like culture and death, right? Because I remember there's a lot of Filipino kind of experiences, there's all these superstitions that folks jump in. All of a sudden I feel like there's like a new superstition that jumps in every time somebody dies, like cut the rosary or whatever, or
I heard
put the child.
that was okay. The cut the rosary, that was I the first time I heard it was with my dad, because my tita asked me, do you have a rosary? And I was like, I have one in the house, sure. And she's like, oh, well, we need to put one in the coffin. And I was like, and we have to cut it. And I was just like, I'm not going to cut, like the rosary I have is this nice one. Like I'm not going to cut, it's made with metal. Like it's not one of those cheapy plastic ones that your block rosary uses. And so my tita was like, oh, I have an extra one. And I'm like, of course you do, because you're the head of the block rosary. So yes, use one of these plastic ones. So she brought it and then she's like, we have to cut it. And I was like, we do? Why? I don't understand. And she was like, oh, because so that death doesn't travel, that it stops here with your dad. And I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
And like those, and there was another one, like, I told my aunt, like, when you go home, don't go home after we visit my dad. Like you got to stop somewhere else. So like she said that she stopped by St. Genevieve. That's the church, our old church. And they like got out of the car. And then she told me and Mike, don't go somewhere else. Don't go home right away. I was like, okay, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
But what was the reason for that one?
So the spirits don't follow you from the from the cemetery.
Okay, so here's the thing. And then, so there was the cut rosary, and then there was one where, they would pass the children over the casket so that the spirits don't, and all of that. And I remember, so that the spirits don't visit. But I was at that age where I was a little too big to be carried over, but I was still a kid. And they were like, oh no, she's fine. And I was like freaked out. I was like, they're going to visit me. And then I spent so many years as a child feeling terrified, right? Because there's like this folklore about, oh, they're going to visit you and, whatever. And I just felt like it was really insensitive. At the end of the day, I realized now I'm at a point in my life where I would like when I dream of my loved ones, I'm so happy that they visit me. Like I wouldn't want to be, and the whole cutting of the rosary to stop death, like you can't stop death, like you were just saying, Michelle, like that is the one thing we are all needing. It's when right. And so with that said, I would love to know or if you could share any of your thoughts about how these Filipino cultural superstitions kind of help or hinder the way that we deal with death and the process of dying.
I think, everybody relates to death and dying as a culture in many different ways. Even in the Philippines, we're so diverse, right? You have Muslims in the south, like I said, you had to be buried 24 hours after. To the north, the Sagadas who hang coffins in the caves, so that kind of their spirit protects the town. Even Ifugaos, I think the practice of Bugawa, where they dig up the graves and clean the bones and then put it back, So there's definitely a lot of indigenous cultures that are very diverse within the Philippine culture and practices of death and dying. But, I think rituals, traditions, superstitions serve a function for any culture and whatever that tradition and culture might be. Is it hurtful? I mean, like for you as a child, it seemed like it was, because the sentiment is that they're going to follow you, they're going to visit you. And, we certainly don't want that. But again, it comes from a long tradition of, I would say, just not really honoring the goodness of those who've died. So in some practices, there's saying that the veil is very thin, right, between the living and the dead. It's very, very thin, so that you've got even old manangs who can see through that and receive the death. And for some of you, I don't know if you've experienced this either as superstitions, or you've actually experienced where I feel somebody, or they come visit me and my sleep, my dad, or there was just a symbolism. And I think if that's your way of relating to those who've died, who've crossed the threshold, it's a personal take of whether or not that was hurtful or helpful for you. But I think in general, rituals, traditions, and superstitions just serve a function, whether it be as a collective way of coping, collective way of dealing with what's happening, of grieving, right? So for many years, I've seen in the Philippines, I grew up in the Philippines, I witnessed the differences in how we care for the dying there versus here. I within even my family, I mean, we have different ways of sensing those who've passed away. Like I got into pediatric hospice and working with children because when I was 14, my cousin, who was like a sister to me, died from leukemia. And I never really knew what that meant until later on in life. I'm in my 40s now. So maybe in my late 30s, I'm kind of like, I'm starting to remember her. There are these things that we've forgotten in our memory that we just kind of push back, whether it be your, spiritual memory of someone that but they come, she came back to me, her name's Shirley. And, and I think that really prompted me to do the work with children. But we also benefit from superstitions and traditions as a culture. There is a gift to that. So I don't want to say that that's unnecessary or that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Are there any practices that you feel like that you've seen that maybe we could practice a little bit more in our Western Filipino culture, that maybe we could?
I think the way we do, and I know it's from the Spanish influence of visiting Day of the Dead versus Halloween, for example, of the way we honor the dead and the way we relate to them. I mean, you go to the Philippines, you sing songs, you bring your favorite food,
sing karaoke.
Sing karaoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. You put up the tents, and it's such a wonderful way to really honor them, but more so just to think about and just reflect on our own life and to be brought together in that way. So I don't think we do that here in a way that we do in the Philippines.
Thank you.
Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the thin veil between the human world and the afterlife and spiritual world. I'm just wondering, when you are when you're with somebody who's going to pass, what's that process like? Do you pray for that person? Do you just what do you do in that process? Yeah.
I definitely look for signs of physical death, right? So, well versed in, for example, the breathing, the mucus coming out, the liquid. So I look for those signs. For example, the physical death is coming. So I prepare their families for that. Oh, that's okay, or and until they take their last breaths. And for me, it's been across the different practices. It's usually the third day that you see the body just release their soul, if you will. I mean, like after the third day, you see them just really with no life. And this is why I say between death and 3 days after that, to talk to them, to hold them if you can, to touch them, to lay next to them. I know it's not our usual way of approaching that, but the last sense that we lose is the sense of hearing, right? So talking to them, allowing them to hear your voice until the third day. So what I've seen is that, after the third day is usually when they've fully departed from their physical body. Whatever your understanding is or beliefs around what happens with that, maybe there isn't, and it's just all physical, material things and nothing else. There's no soul, nothing. Then that's your belief. But in some practices and beliefs, in something that I personally hold is it's a rebirth into something else. And so I think the most important work is not necessarily our living life, but it's actually afterlife. And so, I mean, it's people, I know a couple of people who practice, they do a lot of hardcore practicing, and they can perceive their loved ones through that veil and really be able to have conversations with that person, and that's what they're relating to, and that's their experience. But for myself, as a death midwife, a doula, end of life guide, however you want to call it, I witnessed definitely more than one occasion the departing of spirit or soul or energy from your body after 3 days. Yeah.
Wow, that's really spot on.
So I thought on the third day.
Yeah, because I remember. Well, yes, with Jesus, third day rise again. But like when my dad was really like on his last days, like we were able to FaceTime, because like that's the only thing that's available at the moment. And there was like one day where they said it was coming, and then he was still hanging around. But on the third day, because it was like a Friday, and then Saturday, I would just FaceTime and talk to him. And then on Sunday, that day I had FaceTime, and I was just like telling him like, it's okay. And, so my dad told me this story once when my Lolo died. He was a computer programmer, and he was in this like secured room where the only way to open the door is through a key card, like a key code. But he was on the side of the door where it was locked. So when he was about to leave the room, the door opened. And no one could open it but him, but the door opened. And so he was like, oh, that's weird. But he was also very like open to spirits visiting. So he just looked in the air and said, oh, thank you to whoever did the opening. When he got home that day, he got a call from the Philippines. My Lolo Nonoy had passed at the time, around the time that the door had opened. So with my dad, I remembered that story. And when I was FaceTiming him, I told him it. And I said, go through the door. Like, open the door. You can go. It's okay. We'll be okay. I got Mike. I got TFAL. I got my friends. I got my family. Oh, I'm the crying one of the crew, if you haven't gotten that. And so I told him, go through the door. It's okay, Dad. Go through the door. And then I went through my day, and it was fine. And then we recorded TFAL, and then there is an episode of TFAL that you don't hear Mike and I anymore at the end, because my dad died when it happened. And I just think like, he did it. He did what I asked. He went through the door. And I feel like for anybody who's going through this, because like with COVID and everything and how shitty it is, like you can't be there with your family, and it sucks. It sucks so bad. But still do those things like hospitals have iPads and it's really terrible, but that's the only way you can talk to your family, but do it. Like, I'm telling you, if you're listening right now and you're going through this, tell your family it's okay that you can do this. And if you have enough time, you should use Michelle's services and get it lined up because it's stressful. Because no joke, the weeks leading up to it happening, I was scrambling. I was making sure that my parents had a cemetery plot. And I had to ask my mom these questions because my dad hadn't set it up. And she, given her faculties, didn't know. And so I had asked questions like, do you want to be cremated? My mom's like, and she doesn't want to make a decision. Like, and that's the thing. My mom didn't want to make any decisions. She was, and I didn't want to put that on her because she was losing her partner. So I was just like, fuck it. I'm going to do it. I will be strong enough to do this. And so I did it. I made the call. I picked the plot. My titas were like, you got to do it early because they're going to charge you a lot. So you should look at the really cheap plot first. So I did. And it was not a good view. And I said, hell no. My parents work too damn hard. I have to visit them. I'm not going to go to a really crappy view. So I picked a plot. It's beautiful. The moment I saw it, I thought, Papa would love this. Look, can you just imagine the pictures are going to be awesome? And for folks who know my dad, he was a photographer. He took all these photos. So if I picked a really shitty ass plot with no view, he would be so angry and probably haunt me. So I did the right thing. And when my mom came to the funeral, like, when we showed her it, she was like, "Oh, Elaine, this is good. This is good." Like, and she was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna be here too, right?" And I said, "Yes," because it's a double. I paid for both of you. That shit was expensive. No joke. It's also really expensive. So if you can line it up early, do it now while you can. Like, lock in 2021 rates because in 2030 it'll be like probably $10,000 more. So I'm just saying, I may have to. How do you do this? How do you get into getting certified and whatnot? Because I am the first in my cousin generation to go through this. And I know that because I am the first, I'm going to be the one that everybody turns to. And so, like, I only have my experience, but like, is there any like way to get further training or resources that like, I don't want it to weigh on me too much, like, because I'm an empath, so it gets really, I get energy suck, and so I don't want it to weigh on me, but I do want to help the people in my life who will go through this in the future. So, like, what are the resources there for folks who like are interested in doing this work?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for sharing your experience with your dad, and it's obviously still very tender, and really, thank you for just being vulnerable. Sometimes it's hard to do that. One of the reasons I got into this work is also to show the practicality of death and dying. It doesn't have to be $15,000. Okay. It doesn't, I mean, to be honest, I mean, from beginning of creating advanced care directive and their death file all the way to Aftercare, it doesn't have to be more than $3,000. Because if you look, especially if, let's say, you're not really buying into the $7,000, $8,000 aluminum steel casket that, they try to sell you. I'm just saying that there are so many different options. But, I try to teach the families that, is this bringing you closer to your loved ones? My favorite is really just offering them a simple box. And I know for some, especially for Filipinos, like, that's not good enough for my parents, and that's fine. But what I've seen though is like, these boxes or even handmade wicker coffins or baskets made by indigenous. There's a couple of indigenous people that I know from First Nations who do weave their basket, and $600. But the idea is that the families can have these and decorate them and say poems and write things. And so there's really a different way of engaging with that. But I'll get to your question, but I just wanted to say that there's such a big reduction in cost when you don't buy into what you think should be the end of life experience, right? I just need to say that you don't need to buy into the $4 billion funeral home business. and 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 to your question, I certified through Sacred Crossing through Olivia Barham, and she's in LA. But with everything now, you can do a lot of online trainings. I'm finishing up the New York Open Center Thanatology, which is a study of death and dying. That's another course to take. But I think, and you can do that route if you feel like this would be helpful for your family, or as, the work you want to get into this work. But at the end of the day, it's even as simple as having a conversation. That's the best training. In Hawaiian tradition, there is ha'aponopo, which is the saying of 4 things, which I encourage everyone to do now, either through letters or even if you're confident enough to say this in front of your loved ones. Is basically 4 things. I love you, and you let them know the ways that you love them. I'm sorry for fucking things up, or for all these things that I've done. Thank you for all the gifts you brought to my life, and forgive me. And so there are these things that you can say now. And the work that I do is to really just, how do you change, not necessarily planning for the end of life, but in rushing through all of the logistics, but you also don't want to rush through the important part of letting them know that they are loved and that you love them and what they meant to you. And so, we rush through that. And that's, I think, is the biggest suffering for those left behind, is I didn't get to say these things to them. And so I like to think that the work that I do is more than just preparing the paperwork, but really preparing them to see their loved ones now, before the end of life. That's the most important thing. It's not waiting till then. It's just doing it now. It's hard work.
That's really beautiful. And some of the hardest things for people to do sometimes, right, is to say that now, but so needed.
But then so much suffering can happen if you are left with that, you know?
Yeah.
I think we've seen that. But so there's many different programs that they can, sign up for. I'd recommend Sacred Crossing if you're in LA. There's several across the country. It's definitely becoming more and more of a movement. Whether, there's not that many of us certified. Oh, that's not true. I can't say that really because I don't know the numbers. But from my experience, just like you guys, I don't know what a death doula is. So every time I present my work, it's a lot of just presenting what it is. So, yeah.
And given COVID, we're all there's 400,000 people who have lost their lives,
right?
And our country is in we're going to be locked in this. I don't want to say locked, but we're all grieving. Everybody is grieving, and it's impacting everyone so much. My dad didn't have COVID, but COVID impacted his death. My dad died in December, but we couldn't have the funeral until a month later because the funeral homes were so full. And it's because I went the traditional route because we are Filipino and that is what I wanted to honor my dad. But I was curious, does your work ever clash with any of those Filipino Catholic beliefs, or does it clash, or does it work with in some ways?
I haven't really worked a lot with Filipino families. I have not in LA. I don't suspect that it will, because if I come from it with the approach of, if they're Catholic, they're Catholic, and if this is your plan, that's your plan. But you tell me how I can assist so that I can be of service. It's not necessarily if they want to pray the novena, fine. If they want to do the 40-day thing, that's doesn't really clash with the work that I do, because it's very universal in some ways. But if they do need help with preparing some of these documentations, if they do need help with, for example, there's this elderly couple, they're Filipino actually, and, Manong was a facility and Manong was at her house, and I needed to go to assist and, translate, but also, that doesn't, and so it doesn't really clash, I don't think, because I think my approach is not religion based.
Yeah. And
Well,
oh, go ahead, Joe.
I was gonna say, like, how has there's a lot of grieving, like as Elaine said, going on with COVID. Like, how has your work shifted because of the current pandemic?
It's a great question. In the beginning, it shifted in that I couldn't go into the home, and I still can. It's still kind of limited because I'm an advocate for home funeral. So I tend to, if let's say if somebody dies in their home, you don't need to necessarily call 911 right away and have their bodies taken. You can have the body there as long as you want, really. And so in that sense, it impacted because I can't go to the homes because of COVID. So I've done a lot more of Zoom, of guiding families through some of the issues around hospitalization nowadays. And Elaine is really right. I mean, right now, even COVID or not, especially if you're a COVID patient, you die, they double bag you and they ship you up right away. Sometimes families don't have a chance to see their loved ones, and that's really hard. And even if you're not COVID, because of the impact and the density and the morgues, it's hard to be with your loved ones. So I've done more, Zoom work, phone conversations for helping with bereavement and the grieving process. But definitely the packet that I'm talking about, which is creating death files for people who are much more interested in what do I do if something happens to my parents? What are some of the documentations? What are the legalities in California that I need to know about? How do I get a death certificate? How many do I need to get? All these things that prompted people because of COVID to think more about that aspect of it.
The way that my parents had first kind of sprung this on, I don't know if they have it all completely planned out, but they were going on a trip to China, and they were like, so they handed me this brown manila envelope, and they said, just in case anything happens to us, here you go.
Oh my God, my mom did the same thing.
Yeah, and I was like, what are you talking about? And then, after I got over the initial shock, I was like, that is very thoughtful of them. Cause I would also, I didn't begin to think, I'm like, wow, if something happened to them, I got to figure out how to get them back over here, how to, whatever. And it was, and I looked at it, and it was good to see, what documents, what connections we had to the Philippines, like what responsibilities they had. And so it was very, it was very helpful. And what it ended up doing is when my husband and I traveled overseas, I didn't do a full on thing. Like I still have to get my things in array, but I did put together like a document that I sent to my best friend who's an attorney and said, okay, should anything happen, at least you have the basics of, certain things like where does my daughter go, what to keep, what to give, just like a basic things. But, it did spark up a bit of a social media conversation. I guess it was last year, about like folks putting their affairs in order, their ducks in a row, should it happen, because we don't know when, but I will say that, so those are, for any of our listeners, perhaps, I mean, we're not traveling now, obviously, but, maybe those are opportune, like prompts, if you will, to kind of do it. But it was very enlightening, Michelle, about like, because to me too, as a Catholic Filipino, we're very much in, the rituals that I've seen have all been through the business of funeral homes. And so it's very enlightening that we can do things in a much more affordable and accessible kind of way, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
We're
hitting our time. So just to wrap up, and I just want to share with our audience and our listeners, like, thank you for witnessing my grieving process, because I'm still in it. Super in it. But I feel like the universe put us in conversation because it was necessary. And like, my cousin, even when I have these cousin Zooms, when I was going through everything with my dad, he was like, Elaine, what tips do you have for us? And I literally was like, this shit sucks. Make sure your parents have advance directive, because you have to make up all of this on your own if not. And then I was just like, make sure you ask them, do they have a plot if they want to do that? Or do they want to be cremated? Like, get it done. Have open conversations with them. And I know as Filipinos, it's hard to freaking do that, but do it. Like, honestly, just get it lined up, create that document, do that. And I really love this. That's the Hawaiian culture saying the 4 things. Like, legit, I would add that to your document of all the 4 things and be like, I love you. I'm sorry I fucked up. Thank you for loving me. Forgive me for fucking up. Like, all of these things. Like,
That's
I'm gonna
great.
do that. I'm totally gonna write these down now.
Yeah.
As a practice.
Yeah, even the most mundane of like in the death files that I do, having them list all the passwords. You know, for example, somebody died and nobody had access to their phone and couldn't get any information about their next of kin. Nobody knew the password, or bank accounts and all of these things. You know, all those things that sometimes we don't think about that we're gonna need to close, and that you're leaving your family with some of these things. So it's a good gift to give, I think.
Yes, exactly. Any other final thoughts, Joe, Mike, Kat?
No, I mean, thank you so much for coming here. I mean, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Just really thinking about the inevitable, it's people we don't like to talk about it, but we have to. So
and the message is that talking about it, it's really just engaging with life in general and informing how you can live a better life. It's not so much about that moment, but it's every moment that we have from now until then. So that's the message I have. And thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be able to share my experience as Filipino American and what that's been like for me. So I appreciate the time.
So folks want to connect with you. How can they reach you?
Gosh, I am horrible. I don't have Instagram. I don't do social media stuff. I don't. They can email me. It's MMONDIA. So that's mondia@gmail.com. My website is under construction right now because I'm removing some old things and revising a bunch of videos on it. But that should be coming up. And so that would be one way to get a hold of me. Any questions they might have, do you want to talk about a process they're going through? I'll be more than happy to talk to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
All right. Thank you, guys.
This Filipino American Life is produced by Michael Nailat. Our intro and outro music is by Roger Habon, aka 10.4 Raj. Resident reality checker Girly Colado, legal advisor Rianne Fajardo, and graphic design by Vincent Collyer.